Welcome back to Mohawk Motors, everybody. My name is Jason, and you can see behind me, I've got my neighbor Steve's AMX back in the workshop. I've got a short list of things to do on this thing, getting it ready for the spring car season, and I'll show you what we're doing as I get through things here. So let's get back to work on this classic. I love this car. Well, first thing on my list, if you recall, last year when I was working on Steve's car, we replaced the steering gearbox because he had a leak. And did that, perfect, no problems. Car stopped leaking, running good. Steve took it all around. Won actually quite a few awards with the car last year. So I'm honored to get to work on an award-winning car. But he noticed that he had what seemed to be a very, very slow leak. He said if he left it parked for a week or so, he'd see a little drip on the ground. So I've been investigating that leak, trying to find it, and I found it. And what we had leaking was actually the return line for the power steering system. And I've already replaced it with a new piece of hose. And this is, the return side is not pressure, or it's not under pressure. It's just once the fluid pressure has been used in the steering gearbox, it needs to return to the reservoir. So there's really no pressure on this hose, but there is fluid flowing through it pretty much constantly anytime the engine's running. And the old hose, we'll see if you can actually see here, but to the naked eye, it looks fine. But what I found is if I revved the engine up and I flexed the hose, can you see the cracking in there? In position, fine. But flexed, very, very slight cracking. So the hose was just old, dry rotted, and more than likely me screwing around with it when I replaced the steering gearbox probably opened one of those cracks up enough that it was weeping fluid. So we've got a new hose on there now, and I've had it running for about 25 minutes before I picked the camera up, turning, revving it up, and it's dry as a bone. I'm sure it's probably hard to see through the camera here, but everything in there, dry, 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 no leaks, no nothing, which is what we wanted. So we've got that sorted out. Next thing I want to tackle is the alignment on the windows. And let me see here. So these are frameless windows. And what we're having an issue with here is, I don't know if you can tell, but the glass doesn't line up very well with the weather sealing. Especially here at the back, you can see there's a gap there, clear as day. So what I'm gonna try to do is get these window tracks lined up a little better inside the door to get that glass up against this weather seal like it's supposed to be. Because if Steve should get caught out driving in the rain, he says it just makes a vortex and it blows water on the back of his ear. So we're gonna try to get that sorted out. Well, I don't claim myself to be a body or glass guy, but I think I've got these windows lined up pretty spot on now. Remember before we had that gap that you could see through? Now we're lined right up. There was just enough adjustment left in the window track and in our rear window seal here that I was able to get it sealed up right. And now she's good and tight. Should keep the water out. Same on this side. This side had a gap too, and now she's sealed up. So that checks that item off the list. Steve mentioned that the glove box was binding up on him. It didn't want to shut correctly sometimes. So I'm going to get into that next, see what I find under there. And then we got to look into the oil pressure sensor. The oil pressure gauge is, he says it's kind of finicky, sometimes high, sometimes low. So we're going to look into that and see, maybe we just have a loose connection, maybe there's something else. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. First, I'm going to figure out what's going on with this glove box. Ta-da! There we go. Got that sorted out. That actually took longer than I thought it was going to. It's very difficult to get the bolts off on the hinges. And there were some pieces, a couple screws inside missing. Basically, glove box door here. The hinges down here in the bottom corners bolt into a metal bracket. Well, this side of the bracket was bolted to the dash support like it's supposed to be. This side of the bracket was free floating, which was causing two problems. One, it was letting the glove box move all over the place and not be where it was supposed to be. But two, after I put it in and adjusted it, then the bracket would shift and then it wouldn't be right. So I got those screws. I had some screws that matched, so I put those screws in. The bracket is supported correctly now. Now the glove box opens and closes like it's supposed to. And the duct for this aftermarket air conditioning system, it was in the way also. But I was able to, it's tight back there, but I was able to find some space that I could reroute it and tuck it up and get it out of the way. So we've got this glove box working correctly now. So the next thing we need to look into is the oil pressure gauge. I'm looking at this gauge and seeing this line right here. I'm pretty confident we have a mechanical gauge, not an electronic gauge. So I'm going to move the car forward. I'm going to get it up in the air so I can see where that line goes and trace it out. But good and bad of a mechanical gauge, right? The bad is that if your gauge gets old and starts to have issues, the only thing you can really do is find someone who rebuilds mechanical gauges, which who even knows if those people exist anymore, or replace the gauge. Which also, I mean, this is an old car, so it would probably be pretty difficult to find a replacement gauge. So I'm going to get the car in the air, check it out. Again, need to look over the underside of it anyway to make sure everything looks good, get everything greased, make sure that it's ready to go for cruising season this year. But I have a suspicion what we're going to find is that the gauge needs to be rebuilt or replaced. And replacement is something I can do. Rebuilding a gauge, that's not something I can do. So I'm going to get it up in the air and I'll bring you guys back. All right, so car's up in the air, obviously. And you can see that little brass fitting with the copper line coming out of it. Tells us that we do in fact have a mechanical gauge. And I'm following the copper line. And I can see it comes up, goes through the firewall. There were a couple issues with this copper line that I corrected. One, it was rubbing in several places. Fortunately, it doesn't seem to have rubbed through, but eventually it would have. So I was able to bend the line and move it a little bit so that it's not rubbing anything anymore. The other problem, one of the places it was rubbing was against the header. And as you may or may not already know, when oil gets hot, it expands. And if we have a copper line with oil in it laying against a header, as the temperature in that header goes up, and resultingly the line and the oil inside of it goes up, that could cause some weird issues with our oil pressure reading. So I'm suspecting that may have been part of the problem as well. And looking around under here, I don't see anything else obviously wrong. So I'm going to keep going, give it a little bit more of a look over. I don't see anything else that I can do with the oil pressure gauge right now. I won't be sure until I can take the car for a test drive and keep an eye on the oil pressure and see what it does. But I'm pretty confident that's going to make a difference. And I'm going to look around under here, like I said, get everything greased, make sure I don't see anything else that needs to be addressed. All right, well, folks, great news. Pretty much everything under here everything under here with a grease fitting on it readily took grease, which is nice. I don't see anything else that looks wrong or like it may become a problem or anything like that. I did get the U-joints greased. I did go through also. Steve asked me to see if I could find any identifying marks or like serial numbers or things like that. I was able to find a tag and ID number on the side of the transmission. I can't find anything on the rear end anywhere. And the block engine casting numbers I'll have to try to get from above, from up on top. But I think that pretty much covers everything that Steve asked me to look at that I needed to look at. I am going to get it down off the lift, take it for a test drive, and see if getting the oil pressure line rerouted corrects the issue with the oil pressure gauge being finicky. And that also maybe, Steve said it didn't do it all the time, so that may just be something that he'll have to drive it a bit and report back to me. But I think otherwise, tire pressures are all good. I think otherwise this thing's ready for another season. I did have to add just a little bit of oil to the transmission. It was just a teensy, maybe 2 ounces, 2 or 3 ounces low. And the rear differential is full, plenty of oil in there. So brakes all look good. I think this thing's ready for another summer of enjoyment. So I'm gonna get it down, see if I can get those block casting numbers. I did also remember, of course, after I put the door panels all back together, the side mirror over here on the driver's door has come loose. So I gotta take the door panel back off and get that screw tightened up. But moving right along on this thing. Pretty happy. Well, I think it's time for a test drive, folks. I got the mirror fixed. That was just a screw that had vibrated loose. Not terrible there. Looked over the engine. All the places where typically engines have casting numbers, I just can't access. I can't get to them. It's either on the front, they're behind accessories that have my view obstructed. On the back, it's just so close to the firewall, I can't see anything. So unfortunately, I can't get any more numbers for Steve, except for those numbers off the transmission tag. And it is what it is, right? So that's man, just look at this car. So cool. So it's a beautiful day. I think it's time I take it for a little test drive and make sure she's running, driving, doing what she's supposed to be doing. Everything looks good, checks out good. Fluids are all full, brakes all look right, tire pressure is good. Everything else is how it should be. So it's time to take it for a test drive and make sure everything is just right. Just letting it get warmed up a little. such a cool car. Sometimes I really debate, should I sell all these trucks I've accumulated and just buy myself a friggin' sick old muscle car? It would be a lot of fun. Well, that was fun. So, back at the workshop here, everything went great. No issues, no problems. Drives great, fun to drive. Everything doing what it's supposed to do. And I noticed after I shut the car off, see our gauge, our oil pressure gauge is still up at about 20 psi, which is a pretty good indicator on a mechanical gauge that it's just worn out. Let me draw a picture. All right, so let's see if I can explain this clearly enough. So in a mechanical oil pressure gauge, or really any mechanical gauge, the way they function is they have a copper coil inside of them. Usually it's copper. Copper has the least memory and can cycle the most times without breaking. So usually they're copper. And the way that pressure gauge works is whatever fluid or air pressure that gauge is reading, as more pressure builds in that copper coil, it tries to uncoil. So you can see here, inside your gauge, behind the face of the gauge, you'd have this copper coil. And coming in here on the center from the back would be your source. So oil pressure, air pressure, whatever it may be. And when there's no pressure, when it's off, in the case of our oil pressure gauge, the coil can completely relax and come all the way back to start over here. Now as the oil pressure, when you start the engine, the oil pressure builds, it makes this coil want to grow. And when it wants to grow, it will pull this part of the coil outward. And typically there's either a little arm attached that twists your indicator needle, or a toothed piece welded or brazed onto the copper that turns a gear that twists your needle. So as more pressure builds, this coil expands, comes up, and that moves your gauge. As there's less pressure, it relaxes back, and that moves the gauge the other way. And we've got a couple indicators here that are telling us it's probably a bad gauge. One, it's not relaxing all the way back to 0 psi when there's no pressure. In an engine oil system, any hydraulic system, you must have flow to have pressure. Pressure is just resistance to flow. So when the engine is off and the oil pressure is not pumping oil, or the oil pump is not pumping any oil, there can be no oil pressure left in the system. So the fact that the gauge is not relaxing all the way back to 0, like I said, really good indicator that it's probably just the coil inside of that thing it's just old and worn out. The copper coil has expanded and contracted enough times that it's just not relaxing all the way back anymore. And the second indicator is we know that we are reading pressure, and it's just a copper line, so there's no electronics or anything else that could be messing it up. It's literally just the pressure of the oil pushing against that coil. And this car is old, and Steve is pretty confident that that's an original oil pressure gauge, at least to the car for many, many years now. So just drive cycles, lifespan, like mechanical gauges don't last forever. Neither do electronic gauges for that matter. So I'm going to talk to Steve and tell him, like, I think we just need a new gauge, and he'll be able to pick out what he wants, and maybe he can find something that matches. Maybe he'll decide he wants to change his gauge and his oil pressure gauge and his voltage gauge. Who knows? We'll see. There's a million options here, but that's I'm 99% sure that's his oil pressure issue. It's just that gauge is just worn out. So that kind of brings us to the end on this thing. It's ready for Steve to go enjoy another season of cruising. The oil pressure gauge isn't going to cause any problems. He knows his base is at 0 when the engine's, or at 20 psi when the engine's off. So if he's driving and he sees that gauge at 20 psi, he knows he's got a problem. And it'll probably start making noise long before that point. So I think that's it.